Hello, everyone, and welcome to another round of the Future Forecasting Group. I'm your host, Sean, and I'm joined by our rockstar remote viewing team. We have Edward, Naeem, Daz, Dick, and Derek. And today we're going to be going through the hits from February 2025. And today's date is the 30th of April 2025. I can't believe we're almost in March. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you guys what I came up with for analysis.
So these are things that we said in February or January or earlier for February. So we've let
Correct.
that marinate for a while. So we published this data in January.
Yeah, our viewing team did their due diligence and did their remote viewing probably the last week in January 2025. And I got matching stories for every single thing that you guys had in here. And there was a lot this month. This was a lot to go through. Not only did you guys have a lot of corroborating stuff, but you had a lot of individual one-off stuff that just kept on coming through. And just a disclaimer to our subscribers, when I go through these, I just find the best matching news story that I can find that matches what the viewers had. I'll leave it to your discretion to decide whether or not you think it's a hit, but I try to find the best matching thing out there that I could find, and I put it up there for your consideration. So without further ado, our viewing team had a lot of extreme weather events. Naeem had like this electrical stuff going on in the atmosphere, kind of like a fizzle crackle type thing. Dick had like a vortex storm, talking about bad weather, and Daz had a vortex type storm. So although I didn't see stuff for Europe. I did see that tornado season. It is not normal for tornadoes to come in February. That's just not a normal thing. And Tennessee got hit pretty bad. There were some fatalities involved. And there was quite a bit of solar activity that hit with an X-class flare that disrupted our technology systems, and that was on February 25th. That corresponded with our viewers' data. Both Daz and Edward got this information that seemed to coincide with some sort of a midair collision or crash. And so here's Daz has this, two things hitting in the air and then going down. And notice Edward has like this, pit in the ground. Well, there was a midair collision in Arizona. Two small planes collided. One of them, unfortunately, resulted in a fatality. The other one was okay. But this picture almost looks like what Edward sketched here. And you could almost say what Daz sketched as well. I thought that was kind of interesting. We also had Naeem with a plane crash and Dick talking about a violent crash, smashed wreckage of a vehicle or a plane. And of course, in Toronto, we had the Delta plane that flipped. That was a big news story. And also, Dick said that somebody died too young, a famous person. We had Angie Stone, not super famous, but she was a Grammy nominated singer, and she was killed in a rollover crash as well. So that matches with what the viewers predicted for February. Peace advances. We had the viewers saying that there was going to be some advances towards the Ukraine peace talks. And there was quite a few stories in February talking about us moving toward closer to peace talks. Although that has been a slow process and it's still unfolding to this day, the news stories back in February were pushing that narrative. Financials were down for the viewers. And of course, we had, February 2025 market update. Stocks were struggling, but bonds were doing good that month. We had a lot of fire data come up. Dick had some sort of a historic building fire, and Edward had a skyscraper fire. Well, we had a historical property in Cleveland get destroyed by fire, and Charlotte had a high-rise fire. So there were two fires that matched what the viewers predicted. Naeem had something resembling the wildfires, which is interesting because we had just gotten through the news cycle of the LA wildfires that had devastated that area. So I'm sure when Naeem was getting this data, he's like, oh, this just happened. But he put it down as protocol mandates. And sure enough, in North Carolina later in February, we had quite a few wildfires. So nice work, Naeem. Cartel border action. Both Edward and Dick were getting some violence at the border. And Dick even had a cartel boss being killed. There was a gunfire exchange at the Mexican border, and there was also a cartel boss. The Fat Man was finally caught. He wasn't killed, but he was caught. So I thought that was really interesting pertaining to what the viewers were predicting. So the viewers had their predictions for Bitcoin, and I think Naeem had the closest hit, but yeah, it was kind of sporadic through the month, but it ended up going down. And I think that's what Naeem had here. Political standoff. Daz had a political standoff. And of course, we had this iconic meeting at the Oval Office with Zelensky, Trump, and VP Vance. This was all over the news, and this kind of matches with what Daz was describing in his two mails. Earthquake. Asia, coastal, big earthquake, and Taiwan had a big earthquake, a 5.2. In fact, they had several that month, but the 5.2 was the biggest one. Traffic gridlock from Derek. And as federal workers were coming back to work in February, there was indeed stories about, hey, the traffic in DC is crazy. Foreign hospital riot. This is a really oddly specific one, and you guys know I love those. Yeah, Derek's saying there's like an angry mob, and they're outside of a hospital of all places in a foreign country. Well, there was a gang that ambushes the Birmingham Hospital in the UK after a teen, 16, was stabbed. And these were migrants, I guess. So there was a big mob that came out. And that's just a really weird story to see. U.S. ambassadors recalled. Although I didn't see anything about specifically U.S. ambassadors being recalled, there was a ambassador to the U.S. That was being called to be recalled regarding his post supporting Trump. And this was in Malaysia, the Malaysian ambassador to the U.S. They were calling for him to be recalled. Blockchain news. Europe announced a payment, like this was big news, a payment system for central bank settlements to be using cryptos. So that was from Derek. Nice work, Derek. Oil prices were called to drop by Derek, and they did go down by 2%. Not a whole lot, but down as predicted. Federal offices filling up. There were news stories about the call back to work and how that was being handled. And yes, the federal workers were coming back. AI rollout in the US government. We're actually still seeing this unfolding today in the news, but back in February, you could see the news stories were already starting. They were talking about, hey, how can AI strengthen citizens' confidence in government? And again, this is continuing to this day, but back in February, it was just starting. We had the police barricade story from Dick, and it was a huge ICE protest out in LA, and it was wall-to-wall LAPD, and it really just resonated with what Dick drew here from what I could tell. A prominent older male death tied to business and science. This Fay Vincent was the best fit I could find. He was a MLB commissioner and a lawyer, and he died at 86. This is a younger photo of him, but I'm sure he had gray hair when he died. Dick, you had the Super Bowl here. I mean, the Eagles won. I wasn't quite sure what this was predicting, but
Well, that was Buffalo. That's a miss.
okay,
That's a
this
good
was a miss
miss.
then. Okay, I
Didn't
wasn't
even
sure.
make it in.
Yeah. All right. Well, okay, I'll say this one was a miss then. I wasn't quite sure how to interpret because you just had the picture. JFK files confirm the remote viewing data saying multiple shooters. Yes, the two shooters narrative was supported by the files that did get released. This is another really crazy, oddly specific one. It's not every day you see news stories about Jesus appearing, and it wasn't a huge prominent story, but there was a guy who had a horrific accident, and he said Jesus appeared to him and he transformed his life. This guy wrote an article about it, and that was in February, the 23rd, actually. So nice work there, Dick. Jill Biden shadow ran the presidency. So there was a tell-all aide who released something that was talking about this. I couldn't find it in the news, but there were a lot of mainstream media kind of wants to avoid this, but there were mainstream sources hinting at this. Like this one, White House aides finally reveal who really ran the country as Biden slid into mental incompetence. And then they kind of dodged it in the story. But I do know that there was a woman who came out and was saying, yeah, Jill Biden was running things. But I could not find the references to it in doing my research. Classic UFO sighting. Dick said that there would be a UFO. This isn't an actual photograph, of course. This is what they used for the story. But there were reports of a flying saucer type disc that was out at an airport. I forgot which airport this was. I believe it was in Europe. Trump and Pope call. I didn't see the news article about them actually holding a call, but there were a lot of news articles titled Pope calls for this, Pope calls for that regarding the immigration policy of Trump. And behind the scenes, they may have had the phone call, but I thought that was interesting. The word call was in the news stories, and this is just an example I pulled up. Vaccine death revelations. Edward said that there would be a look into vaccine deaths. And again, this is something the mainstream media likes to avoid, but there was some studies published. And of course, there were fact checkers coming out saying, oh, no, they're not saying that. But as you can see in this editorial and several others, there is serious, questioning going on about, hey, what's going on with these? So nice work there, Edward. Edward also said AI solves a crime. Although we are starting to see this narrative playing out, I didn't see a specific crime mentioned, but this is big in the news. And this story, for example, was talking about how AI is reshaping the criminal justice. Not only is it causing crimes with high-tech deep fakes where they're using it to commit fraud, but they're also using AI to help catch the fraudsters. And so it's a really interesting thing that's unfolding. Bad flu month. In fact, I think in February I had the flu really bad. So thanks for the warning, Edward. And yes, the news stories confirm, this was like the worst flu season in 15 years. It was crazy. Edward had a nuke plant leak. Although he was talking about corrosion in his viewing data, in the stories that I saw, there was actually a drone that pierced the outer shell of Ukraine's Chernobyl nuclear plant. But they're saying radiation levels are normal, and I'm questioning, are they really telling us the truth there? But I thought that was a really interesting story given what Edward saw in his predictions. Mitch McConnell health issues. Yes, Mitch McConnell was all over the news in February, talking about his freezing and his falling and what might be causing that medically. High-profile confrontation from Naeem. He likes to get these parliament fights. We need more of these in government, right? To help settle our fights. 4 lawmakers were suspended after a fight, and this is in South Africa. And this was from 1st of February 2025. Yeah, draw the chair next time, Naeem. But that was pretty cool. Let's see, Vivek News. Vivek was in the news in February for his bid to run for Ohio's governor. That'll be interesting since I'm in Ohio, and there's talk about him saying, hey, we want to get rid of property tax. I hope that happens. But yeah, big in the news in February for Vivek. Human rights issue. With the deportations beginning in February, there were all kinds of news stories about this. And here's an example: deported with dignity or disgrace, the dilemma in U.S. immigration policy. So nice work, Naeem. And yeah, 51 slides later, that was a lot to go through, but yeah, you guys did a really good job. Keep knocking them out of the park.
Nice work, Sean, putting all that together.
Thanks. Yeah, of all the analysis jobs, these news ones are the most intensive, but it's always fun just seeing the nuances that you guys catch in your viewing data and how it pertains to the news stories that unfold.
I like Daz's description of 2 men in a political face-off that was, what did he say, fraught with political intrigue, yeah, and dangerous. That was a good, the Zelensky Trump one. That was good.
Yeah,
that was a big story.
It was. So yeah, again, I like seeing what our subscribers have to say in the comments. And you guys help me catch news stories to include in these. So please continue with that. I really appreciate your assistance there.